So welcome everyone to today's event on inclusive teaching. We are recording this panel and it may be shared on our YouTube channel, so I just want to let folks know that this session is going to be recorded. Welcome everyone on behalf of the CIRTL Network. My name is Kate Diamond and I work with the CIRTL Network. We are a network of more than 40 universities around the country and in Canada. And one of those member universities, IUPUI, you know, I'll let the folks from IUPUI explain the acronym because no matter how hard I try to get it right, I'm sure I won't. They're in Indiana and they have organized a 4-part series on inclusive teaching in STEM. This is the first event in that series and I hope you'll check out our website to see the other 3 events in this series that will provide deep dives into what inclusive teaching looks like in different STEM disciplines. And the value of and how learning communities can help foster inclusive teaching across STEM disciplines. We at the CIRTL Network, if you are new to us, teach STEM grad students and postdocs effective inclusive teaching methods so that they can become both excellent researchers and teachers. And given that the title of this event series is about inclusive STEM teaching, this series is very much in the spirit of the work that we do. So I really do want to thank everyone at IUPUI for all of the work that they're putting into this event. I will be attending today's event to provide technical support if anyone has trouble hearing a speaker, if anyone isn't clear on how to interact during the session, please let me know in the chat window. I'll be keeping a close eye on that. And now that those business items are out of the way, I want to turn things over to Dr. Tabitha Hardy, our moderator for today's event.
Hi everyone, we are so excited that you guys decided to join us today for our first in our CIRTLcast series. We're going to focus on inclusive teaching in science. I'm Dr. Tabitha Hardy, and I'm the Assistant Dean of Student Development and Academic Affairs here at IUPUI. IUPUI stands for Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. We're the best of both worlds on one centralized location in Indianapolis. So that explains our acronym. Today we have a host of panelists that we would like to introduce you guys to. First of all, Dr. Anna Jo Arbach. She's a postdoctoral research associate in genetics at the University of Georgia. Dr. Paola Moraga. She's a postdoctoral fellow in ecology at the University of Georgia. Dr. Kelly Lane, who has recently received her PhD in genetics at the University of Georgia. Ms. Maimie Mohammed, who is an undergraduate student here in the neuroscience department at IUPUI. And Dr. Joanne Powell Kaufman, who is a faculty and chair of biology at Iowa State University. So we just want to get a feel for who all are in our session today. And if you could just use our whiteboard and take a minute or two to tell us what your discipline is. If you're in biology, physics, chemistry, you can click on our whiteboard and let us know.
As a reminder, you can type directly onto the whiteboard by going to the vertical toolbar to the left of the slide and clicking the 4th icon down. Whiteboard could get a little crowded. I'll keep an eye out to try and keep things orderly as people keep adding their input.
Well, so we've got a lot of people from all over: neuroscience, immunology, chemistry, biology, folklore, religious studies. Thanks for joining us. Interdisciplinary studies, anatomy, biology, plant ecology. Awesome. What a diverse crowd we have here today. We're so excited to have you guys join us. If the whiteboard tool is not working for you, feel free to share that in our chat box down at the bottom of your screen. Thank you guys so much for sharing your disciplines with us. So we're going to go ahead and start our panel to talk a little bit about how various disciplines within science approach diversity and inclusion. And we want to kind of take an aspect as to whether or not there's differences in undergrad and graduate teaching, what kind of formal and informal structures or policies and practices exist, okay? And so at the bottom you'll see an additional whiteboard where you can ask questions or place comments. You'll do that the same way that we did in the previous slide. So I'd like to ask my panelists if they would like to take the lead on one of these questions. If you would just use the raise your hand tool and we can acknowledge you. Hi, Maimie.
Hi, Tabitha. I'm an undergrad student at IUPUI, and at least in my experience, I think at least in general, the way that science approaches diversity and discussions of diversity mostly has to do with retention of, diverse students, really students of color in science. But I think there's a lack of conversation about why are we even talking about diversity in higher education? Does diversity somehow, decrease by the time we, get to undergrad? And does, is higher education the cutoff for some reason in discussions of diversity? And I think that people sort of miss the fact that, the reason that we have these disciplines that are not diverse and they really cater more to more privileged populations is that education in itself is kind of rooted in social inequality and economic inequality, and so when we're looking at, why are not more people of color like engineers, and we look at the rates of, for instance, militarization of schools, the policing of schools in elementary school, which disproportionately affects, black and brown children, and these schools are also largely underfunded compared to other schools that are predominantly white. And so I would like to see more discussion, I think, in sciences when we're approaching discussions of diversity that kind of go back to the root of the problem, because it doesn't start at the undergrad level. This starts all the way in the beginning of education in the United States.
Wow, great comment, Maimie. Paola?
Yeah, I would like to share probably a little bit of what people in ecology have been doing regarding just teaching, at least at the undergraduate level. Well, the Ecological Society of America has this wonderful program that is called the Strategies for Ecology Education and Development and Sustainability program. It basically started in 1996, and by now we have a large number of universities that have joined and they have a chapter. UGA, the Autumn School of Ecology, probably is just having one of those chapters where basically allows the undergraduate students to have that they come from minorities to have interactions that are more direct with faculty that will allow them to have preliminary experience while they are undergraduates with faculty. Also, they have support, so they have funding that allows them to go and belong to some networking, go to networking events, or even to field sites and have classes that allows them to have that experience with faculty that allows them to network in levels that they have not been able to do in the past. So that's one of the things that I have seen that people in ecology are doing. And definitely there are summer bridge programs also where people that are transitioning from high school to college can be joining in the same way as faculty during the summer and have some experience, preliminary experience as to how college is going to look like to help them to be more successful while they are in college.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I just want to encourage my moderators to make sure that your video and your microphone are on when you speak. Thank you so much. Hey, Paula. Julianne, you got a comment? Did we lose Joanne?
Joanne, make sure that you turn on your talk and video buttons so that we can see and hear you.
Is this good?
That's perfect.
Great.
I was going to speak to some of the mechanisms or some of the strategies that we're looking at as we transition more and more courses towards active learning, trying to understand how it is we can build groups in ways that promote inclusion. This is especially important in those courses where we don't have a diverse student body, where there may be, for example, only a minority of women or a minority of people from one background or another. When we put the groups together, sometimes we'll even structure courses to assure that there are a reasonable number of women, for example, in a calculus class, so that when groups are formed, the women aren't always the only woman in that group, and that can be very helpful. We've also here we emphasize student learning communities, and we found that students who are in a learning community will have a 7% increase in freshman retention compared to students who are not in the student learning community. So these are the things that we think about structurally in helping to promote inclusion and to enable a diversity of students to succeed.
Thank you so much for your comment, Joanne. Thank you, Nate, for sharing with us the journals looking at gender ratios and how they affect class performance. If we have others that have comments, please feel free to place them on our whiteboard. Do we have any other panelists that would like to address this issue? If not, we can move to question 2. Oh, here we go. Anna Jo?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
I can't hear myself. I was just going to say that an informal measure that some colleagues and I use in our introductory biology courses, when forming groups, there's such a large basis of our active learning pedagogies and just overall student performance, is that we send out an email that just asks students to share any relevant information, whether it's they're going to miss class for a religious holiday or they don't want to be the only female in a group. I share research about how some groups maybe feel a little iffy about being participating in group active learning based on maybe they're not a native English speaker or whatever it is, because every class of students that I have is different and every individual is different. So I found that whether they actually take advantage of that informal measure or not, it helps the entire student body to feel more included and like they have a voice, and just to make sure that I'm not structuring groups in a way that would deter students from learning.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that comment. We have a few questions that are coming in on our chat board. I'm going to try and read out the first one. Can anyone speak to the use or impact of formal documents and recommendations from professional societies on diversity and inclusion? Astronomy has the Baltimore Charter, and there's a time correlation with increasing numbers of women and people of color in the field, but I'm not convinced that's casual. Anyone want to speak to that? Any panelists with a comment for that one? Give us a minute to think about it, and I'm sure one of our panelists will have a comment for you. Another question we have, are there other ways that we can address diversity and inclusion before college? Another question that's come through, how can STEM leverage the diversity in the classroom, like particular projects, assessments that allow students to share their diverse experience? Maimie?
I just kind of wanted to talk about the second question. Are there other ways that we can address diversity and inclusion before college? So I think it's really a priority in undergrad and in the science field, as it should be, to increase diversity, right? Because all these people have a lot of knowledge to provide and can really provide different theoretical frameworks really for the research. Other than kind of bridge programs, like, is there really an effort of colleges to go into elementary schools, to go into middle schools and to provide funding for underfunded schools to have, functional labs or even any labs, and, to help fund science classes really? Is there any work being done there? And I personally have not seen, and there might be, but I think that that's a way that the community, at least, the college community, can give back and help support students of color, namely, to be interested and go into the science fields by showing them that they care, right? That's a way of showing these communities that these universities care about their experiences and about what they have to share in the future, and believe that they have the ability to be immunologists and neuroscientists and physicians and et cetera.
Number of initiatives on the IUPUI campus that address students at the K-12 level and sort of look at and go out into our high schools to address diverse populations and college preparedness and readiness prior to their undergraduate experience. And we have a number of those programs that reach out to diverse populations. Another question that we had says that, how do you handle low reading comprehension, not just English as a second language? We also have a few comments that have popped up. One that addresses some of the programs that they offer for diverse high school students and middle school students and bring them into summer programs. We do that as well on the IUPUI campus. A commenter has said, one problem seen at my institution is advisors not letting graduates do outreach. That could be an interesting topic if anyone wants to speak to it. It also seems like leveraging diversity could be great, but could also lead to individuals feeling singled out. How could you avoid that? I found some great resources and how the effects of sex could lead to the misinterpretation of, oh, she's still writing. We'll let her keep writing. So do any of our panelists want to address this before we move to our next question? Kelly?
Okay. I feel like this question about how can STEM leverage diversity in the classroom, and the comment about leveraging diversity and the kind of danger of singling out students. Obviously, those are related topics. And I think when we're talking about leveraging diversity, you can think of two things. You can think of the power of group dynamics. So we kind of talked about that a little bit, making sure that no one feels alone in their group, but also creating groups that have people with diverse voices. And I think we can utilize that diversity without making people feel singled out if we create groups in classrooms that have things like classroom contracts and group contracts, where we say that one of your responsibilities as a group member is to make other people feel respected and other people feel heard. Make sure that there's a group member who's assigned the task of making sure that everybody gets the chance to speak. And in that way, you're allowing those diverse voices to have their time and to be able to impact the experiences of other students, but you're not requiring them to have that time, or you're not demanding those students to speak up in a way that's uncomfortable. By creating an environment where each individual has equal expectation of involvement, you're allowing that diversity to both be heard and not be put on a singled out situation, where you're not calling on a student because they have some diverse background or diverse experience. You're calling on that student because they need to have just as much time in the classroom as another student.
Thank you so much, Kelly, for that. So we're going to move on to our second question. How do instructor-learner identities and demographic realities inform inclusive teaching within the various disciplines of science? Panelists? Hi, Kelly.
I think one place to start with this is when we think about classroom dynamics, or even thinking about graduate training and graduate mentorship, recognizing that the instructor not only has an identity, but they also come in with bias. Each person has their own implicit biases that they're bringing into the classroom and applying to the classroom, or with their interactions with any peer or mentee. And the fact of the matter is, especially in the sciences, there's a large number of white men who may have different biases than white women or women of color, or etc. And so to encourage faculty, no matter what background they have, to kind of think about their own biases and confront them so that they know how to direct the classroom can be really important. I've sent in one link that I highly recommend. It's Project Impact from Harvard. Has all of these quizzes you can take to kind of think about how you hold yourself and how you approach different people and interacting with people in the classroom, so that your demographic reality has a lesser impact on the realities of your students.
Joanne, did you have a comment? Anna Jo?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, so one of the instructor and learner identities that was present in my classroom this semester was myself, and two of my students are on the autism spectrum. And so one of the things that I did was structure groups so that, and there are many reasons to do groups this way, but that anytime I turned an assignment over to the groups, there was always time for everyone to formulate their own thoughts. And I gave very specific instructions, very structured instructions on how to interact with your groups and share talking time. And I believe that that was helpful. And these were students that, from the email I was talking about earlier, identified themselves. They weren't students on the spectrum that were requiring accommodations through the Disability Resource Office. So had I not sent out that email to ask students to share whatever information they thought was relevant for learning, I wouldn't have known that.
Thanks so much, Anna Jo. We have a comment on our whiteboard that says, what if you completely miss the student's demographic realities? Because of this, the student has a hard time connecting with you as a teacher. What would you do to remediate this issue? And we also have a comment from Joanne. Yes?
I was just going to speak to the fact that the demographic realities of our disciplines is often that historically the demographics of the leaders in our fields have been relatively homogeneous. So sometimes when we talk about the stories of our field and who it is who's succeeding in our field and who's had landmark studies, then we need to make a conscious effort of finding that diverse representation.
Agreed. Thank you so much for that. So we acknowledge the fact that we've got lots of comments coming through and lots of questions that are coming through. If we do not get to address your question at this time, we'll certainly try to address them at the end of our CIRTL cast. So we're going to move to question 3. Scientific theories and topics can be inherently controversial. How do you adjust your teaching strategies to ensure all students' voices are heard? Any panelists want to take this? Joanne?
Well, it's something I think that we'd all like to think that we do readily anyway, but is especially important with controversial topics, sometimes to reframe the students' questions in a way that is respectful and welcomes other perspectives on a topic. So if a student puts forward a perspective or an opinion that could be seen as not welcoming other opinions, then sort of to get ahead of it and to reframe the question in a way that inspires further respectful conversation.
So sometimes also something that I have found useful, especially if I am teaching a large classroom, is to have a discussion board where students can be anonymous and they have the opportunity to make comments if I couldn't address something in class. And also, I think in general, the way that I make sure that all my students are heard is I constantly require feedback at the end of the unit regarding anything. If there's something that I could have been done better to teach them, if there's something that was very difficult for the topic, or any feedback. So I constantly request feedback from the students to know how they are doing, and I remain open for office hours or meetings. So I normally feel that students feel comfortable coming and talking to me regarding issues that I might not know, but if I normally make sure that I am available and offer an environment that is supportive and where they feel that they are heard. And my experience normally has been that I learn many things about my students, situations they go through, and it's made for an enjoyable teaching journey, at least for me.
Thank you for that. Other comments? Other panelists want to address this? Anna Jo?
Yeah, we in my class we get into climate change and anthropogenic climate change, and there is some disagreement and misinformation that is usually that the students bring in with them, some bias and misconceptions and misunderstandings. And we spend a lot of time, at least one whole class period, talking about values and considering stakeholders in situations that are as complex as global climate change. And so we try to give everyone permission to have their opinions and have their different values, but at the same time be able to separate that from scientific fact and what does the evidence support. It's not perfect, but I think it helps make everyone feel like they have a voice and they can voice it, but then when it comes down to answering a question, we can only use the evidence.
Thank you so much, Anjo. We have some questions and comments and an interesting discussion going on our whiteboard. We have several controversial issues in science. One comment that she teaches earth science and have students who state that the earth is flat, but how you coach those students to have a voice, but one that is accurate. One method that I've used is I have used a discussion board, and then I would have those students look up a reputable source to add to their argument. Sometimes that can help them decipher between voices and between accuracy. So we're going to go ahead and address Kelly. Kelly, are you there?
Hello. Yeah, I think, Tabitha, you actually brought up an important point that a lot of students, especially I've taught primarily at the introductory level, and a lot of introductory level STEM students, majors and non-majors, don't understand peer review, and they don't understand what is a reputable source. They don't understand, they get their news from Facebook or Twitter or what have you, and they don't recognize the difference between sources. And I think as scientists, we do it so instinctively that it's actually more challenging to teach than we expect it to be. And so I think especially in courses that have like a lab component, a powerful use of time is to force students to find reputable sources and recognize how to use those. So that when they get into these debates or discussion boards or class arguments, that they're not just pulling from the same unuseful material.
Arash, you have a question? Or comment?
Yes, I just wanted to add something. Yeah, just can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, just wanted to add something to what was said, actually well said. I'm teaching in some introductory courses in physics, for example. So in a class, it's going to be a lot of students from different backgrounds, like mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, chemical engineering, this kind of different disciplines. In order to address this, to create like an inclusive environment for them, I would rather just to bring up some examples from each field related to the course that I'm teaching. I'm teaching physics, so it gave me a lot of opportunity to bring up some application like in different courses. So they don't feel like I'm just talking about like a certain part of the physics. I'm going to bring up something from electrical engineering, chemical engineering, mechanical engineering, or different other type of disciplines, in order to let them know that they can find some application and they belong to the class. The other thing is to create some groups. I think it could help. Is like different groups, and just put them like from different disciplines in one groups, and just start to create either like discussions to come up with like different subjects, and encourage them in order to read about the other disciplines, in order to expand their knowledge. But within the physics, the courses that I'm teaching, actually I use both of them, and I think it's really applicable for like interdisciplinary classes.
Thank you so much for your comment. We really appreciate that. So we're going to move to question 4. We hope that you guys are getting some great ideas on how to include all of these different voices in science. So how does the curriculum and instruction in various science disciplines consider diversity and the different experiences and strengths of learners? Anyone want to comment on this? Get us started. Maimie?
To speak to the instruction, so I served as a general chemistry peer leader for 4 semesters at IUPUI, and I found that the model was really, really effective. If you know, there were student leaders kind of trained in any kind of competency on power and privilege or diversity to kind of interact with diverse groups, because they were able to pull on a lot of the methods actually talked about on this panel that Kelly and Joanne kind of mentioned about, you know, if there's a consciousness and an intentionality in trying to create groups among peers to facilitate learning, you know, putting different learners together and making sure, you know, you're attuned to, you know, female students who don't want to be the only female in the group, things like that, then it provides a really effective, I think, learning environment. And I think sometimes that can be seen actually, in my experience, I was gone for a week one summer for a conference, and another peer leader took my place. And there was some comments back from the student group in that chemistry recitation about how different it was, the interaction, to have this, you know, white male student interacting with them. And in that particular course, I actually had a significant population of people of color in general chemistry. And so I think that this kind of peer learning and providing peer learners who are trained in any kind of competency in diversity or social justice impacts and provides a really safe environment that diverse learners can interact with and learn in.
Thanks for that. Paola?
Yeah, I think it is important to consider trying to get at the different experiences, the strengths of learners, and think very carefully how we evaluate the students. What are we asking them to do to show us that they understand or they know something? So to strengthen that diversity, I think is also good to ask us how are we evaluating and what are the many different forms that we are using to evaluate. So a good variety of participation, assignments in class, reading before class, having quizzes before class and after class, work in class in addition to the examination that they have, I think is a good practice to allow the students, first of all, to learn. And it's been shown that definitely the high structure that we see in active learning environments help underrepresented minorities and all the students in general. So asking us the most important question is how we are assessing their learning, and questioning if we are not providing these diverse ways of assessing, then if we are not doing that, we are not probably helping them, measuring them with all the skills that they have, and not giving them enough opportunities to grow throughout the semester or through the learning period.
That's a good point, Paola. Are there others who'd like to speak to this? We have a few comments that are on our board that I don't think is very good in chemistry. It's pretty poor in physics too. The attitude is that if you can't hack it in our system, then you don't deserve to be in the field. It's unfortunate. I think it is a difficult task. We are very disciplined and content focused, so it's hard to think about the diversity part of this. I think professors are more focused on trying to get through all of the materials each semester and each quarter. Very interesting. And a question that we have, are scientific practices considered to be universal, such as observations, questions, hypotheses, creating models, etc.? Anyone care to address that? What I will say is that as far as the scientific method is concerned, which those that you listed are a part of that, it is considered to be universal. Joanne?
As in each discipline and within professional societies, there's often, in recent years, we've seen more and more of an effort to describe the competencies and the concepts that are most integral to student learning and succeeding in that discipline. Sometimes what we find is that we don't know how to assess some of those competencies, and our instructors don't always know how to teach them well, or at least they're not practiced in it. I think if we're asking the question, we're acknowledging what it is that we'd like to be able to teach. We're acknowledging the different experiences and strengths of learners, and we're embracing the process of discussing these things and moving forward. That's an important step. I don't think we always have the answers, but if we have the humility to acknowledge that, that's huge.
Thanks so much, Joanne. So we'd like to get our audience's opinion again on what challenges have you faced in fostering inclusive learning in the sciences. So feel free to type in your comments here on our whiteboard. We'll give you guys a couple of minutes to do that. What challenges have you faced in fostering inclusive learning in the sciences? We have one comment that says classroom structure or shape. No time to support resources or to do anything other than lecture. Getting students to collaborate in groups and then share their individual creativity. Most of the time I have one hard worker and everyone else, yeah, just going along for the ride. That is an issue. Language barriers, time, attitudes that if students can't handle the standard lecture, then they can't do more. Awesome comments, guys. Thank you guys so much. Keep them coming. Making sure that students are having clear rubrics to grade them and having clear rubrics that can allow those folks who are going along for the ride to know how they'll be assessed. That's a great comment. And designing those other roles for students in that group so that they can address different things or different parts of the group work. Reading comprehension has come back up. Support from graduate school. Finding opportunities to give representation to each group through examples of scientists that are diverse. Helping folks become critical about their own contributions and adding an acknowledgement section at the end of their homework. That could be interesting, definitely. If you don't mind, if you can find this article by Denise Post and post it to our chat, we'd love to have it. Thank you. We still have a few comments coming in. If we missed them, please forgive us. I'm going to try and catch up most of them. So we're going to move to our fifth question, final question, hopefully allow for a few minutes to get audience comments. This last question is, what Innovative strategies and best practices. Foster inclusive student learning. What are some challenges and possibilities? So our last question, what innovative strategies and best practices foster inclusive student learning? What are some challenges and possibilities? Any, Maimie, go for it.
So this isn't like solving the world's problems, but considering some of the comments, people were talking about, well, you know, we have to lecture, and so when is the time to do some of these things? I think I had a professor, my biochemistry professor, during the election, just kind of acknowledge the experiences, just at the beginning of class for like 30 seconds, of people of color or undocumented students or immigrant students in that moment, and just kind of like acknowledge that they may be having difficult experiences at the time. And I think in terms of fostering a safe place, at least for students to learn or to feel like the professor is even just acknowledging that they have a separate experience from the dominant student group in there, I think makes a huge difference. And it made a huge difference for me, and I know people in that class who it also made a huge difference, because even in that moment, like, I was at risk for my parents' immigration status at the time. You know, I was afraid that something was going to go wrong, and how was that going to impact my learning and what I do in terms of school. And I think that's a very simple, like, just a few seconds to sometimes like just publicly acknowledge like a diverse student experience when times like that are happening.
Go ahead, Paola.
I will agree. From my own research, I have sometimes minor things that don't require, by minor I mean that they don't require so much effort from the instructor. When it's possible, just providing diverse examples in things as simple as if we are talking about biology, we are talking about human anatomy, human ages, about when some physiological processes might be happening, just acknowledging the differences that can happen among different human groups was one of the particular examples that one of the students that I happened to talk to when I was doing my research mentioned. He said that being in a class where they were talking about a specific physiological change that women go through, and having an example that only touch base on majority groups make her feel not part of the class. So sometimes it's just us coming and thinking about all the possibilities and all the other people that we are having in the classroom, and how we, in a gentle way, can make them feel that they are part of the class, and that all those experiences that they go through are important. So sometimes it's just trying to be creative and think of all the possible examples that we can have that can acknowledge the existence of all the diverse groups that we have in our classroom.
Awesome. Comments from others? We have a comment on our whiteboard. It says, acknowledging the differences is a great strategy. I agree. Other comments? Kelly?
Yeah, I think why there's so few comments is we've covered a lot of these things today. Things like thinking carefully about group dynamics, about creating group roles if you're choosing to use groups, about creating classroom agreements, and taking a moment to discuss what it is to have respectful and evidence-based discourse between students. Acknowledging differences. Somebody mentioned, trying to use examples of people with different backgrounds and their contributions to science.
which can sometimes be challenging because science has been dominated by kind of one type of experience. But again, I think that having the faculty themselves recognize what biases they're bringing into the classroom is really important, and talking to diverse students about their strengths rather than any deficit. And so, we talk about there's unique challenges for students who are maybe first-generation college students, but talking about the strengths that they bring to the table, where they also haven't learned incorrect ideas previously, etc., and focusing on this, like the strengths of being diverse rather than anything that students may be struggling with is really important in general.
I agree. I agree 100% because it's just in some, unfortunately, a couple of conversations I've overheard, sometimes people is still with the good faith of trying to include minorities focus on the disadvantages or the things that we might not have or the things that we might not have experienced. So I think turning the focus around the strengths and the contributions that we can bring to science is really important. And in the classroom, there are small exercises that can be done as the value affirmations that we have discussed in some of the journal clubs that we have here at UGA. So I have shared a resource that hopefully could be reached by the audience who are interested as to how minor value affirmations can make us all in the classroom reflect about what are the strengths that we have, what are the values that we have, and how those are somehow linked to the classroom experience that we are having, to the content that we are learning. So I will definitely encourage the use of value affirmations for the students.
Awesome, thank you. Maimie?
Yeah, and just kind of one last thing. I think someone might have mentioned this, but I wasn't sure. But in terms of kind of acknowledging the various experiences of students, and I think pulling in diverse examples too is really great. But also, can we, providing like a better way for students to communicate with students. If you can foster, and I think there's a lot of mechanisms for that. Emails and some professors are reaching out well to their students and making sure that students feel comfortable reaching out to them. But I think, that begins with fostering an inclusive space and making the student feel like they're, it's a safe practice to reach out and use existing channels if there are to reach out to their professors. And I think that's very, very important for leaders in science to highlight, whether they're peer leaders or professors or staff, et cetera.
Awesome, thank you so much for that comment. We have a few comments on our board. I struggle with inclusivity when it relates to students' political views. Sometimes they go against creating an inclusive environment for their students. Another comment says, transparent conversations about what a respectful environment looks like may help students recognize when they're not being respectful. So great comments there. Thank you guys so much for those. So we are getting to the point where we are about to conclude our session. So I'd like to leave you guys with some recommended resources. And I think these will be included perhaps in our post eval or our follow-up. And if we have any last-minute comments, they'll be on the event page after today. Thank you. If we have any closing comments from our panelists or from some of our audience members, we have a couple of minutes that we could take those.
I was just going to chime in and say, as people consider any final comments or questions you might have, please also take down this link so that you can let us know what you thought of today's event. That will be hugely helpful, given that we have 3 more events in this series, which I hope you'll all make it to. And whatever feedback you give us today will help us adjust our plans for all of those future events.
Thanks so much, Kate, for that. Thank you guys for attending. Join us next week for our next session on inclusive teaching in engineering and technology. The Thursday following that, we'll have one on inclusive teaching in mathematics and informatics. And then on Wednesday, May 2nd, we'll wrap up our CIRTLcast series on reflections from our IUPUI's culturally responsive teaching learning community. Thank you guys so much for attending, and we really appreciate your participation today. We'll send you guys an email or post the resources on the event page. Thank y'all.